Superman was by far and away one of my favorite DC movies of the last decade. In many ways, it was exactly what I have always dreamed of seeing from a modern interpretation of Superman on the big screen. And James Gunn deserves a lot of credit for crafting a Superman that honored the past yet still felt unique and very James Gunn. However, even though I did love Superman, I think with all of the pressure that's been mounting on the DCU after the release of some not great projects and the potential for a WB and Paramount merger, Man of Tomorrow has to be better, not only at the box office, but most importantly, quality-wise. And today, I want to talk about some ways I think Man of Tomorrow can improve upon Superman and become not only the best Superman movie of the 21st century, but hopefully of all time. One area where I think Man of Tomorrow can honestly improve quite a lot is the action, specifically for Superman. Now, there were some really great moments in Superman, like the fight with the Kaiju, which I thought had some really fun flying moments and unique attacks, but I thought it was the saves that were the highlight of the fight, as well as whatever the hell Guy Gardner was doing. The scene where Superman stops the building from falling on the bridge and saves the woman in her car resulted in not only one of the best shots of the movie, but quite possibly one of my favorite shots of Superman in any movie ever. And I also thought the fight with Ultraman and the Engineer had its moments, especially with some of the Engineer's abilities, even though I thought the fight overall was kind of lame just because I wasn't really interested in the Engineer as Ultraman as characters. There was still some pretty cool action moments. However, by far and away the best action scene of the movie was Mr. Terrific's on the beach, and even though I absolutely love Mr. Terrific, there is no way Superman should be getting shown up in his own movie by anyone, especially considering how powerful the character is and all of the unique abilities Superman has. I think an insanely powerful villain like Brainiac will help with this issue because it'll allow James Gunn to do some more creative things with the character and just let Superman in general let loose a bit more as he's going against somebody that is a threat in a hand-to-hand fight. And also on top of that, a lot of the times Brainiac has an android or robot army, which allows for Superman to showcase a bit more of his power because he's not at risk of taking a life. Now, if they go with the whole mind-controlled army type thing, that whole point might be irrelevant, but regardless, what threat they're going to be going against in this movie is certainly going to be greater than what we saw in Superman, so I do expect Superman to just show off a bit more of his power. And when I say I want Superman to show off more of his power, that does not mean I want Superman in the DCU to become insanely OP, because one of the best parts of Core and Sweat Superman is the fact that he does seem vulnerable and like he can be beaten. I don't want a god like Superman who can't be challenged. I honestly think those types of interpretations of the character are uninteresting and boring, but I would still like to see Superman evolve to use his powers in more fun and unique ways. Now, zooming out on Superman, I do think the action in this movie should just be better anyway, with the influx of so many characters who also possess immense power on top of the already established Justice Gang who had the best action in Superman in my opinion. I have no idea what James Gunn is going to do with Mr. Terrific and how he's going to top Mr. Terrific's fight scene in Superman, but I have pretty high confidence he will find a way, as I thought he upped the ante in each Guardians movie when it came to the action, so I have full faith he will find something insane for Terrific to do in Man of Tomorrow. Seeing Guy perhaps fight alongside Jon Stewart could be absolutely insane, and I would love to see James Gunn get more creative with the Lantern abilities. I thought a lot of what Guy did in Superman was funny, but I want to see James really showcase the power of the rings in a way he just simply didn't really do in Superman, maybe with Jon, who of course is not only a little bit more serious, but also a bit more talented with his creations. I think James Gunn could do something truly special. Hawkgirl definitely deserves a bit more of the spotlight than what she got in Superman, where she basically just screams and I think hits like one or two people, plus she almost gets blinked to death. Hawkgirl is an absolute badass and needs to be treated as such. There is also Blue Beetle, Metamorpho, Kara, Maxima, and who knows what other characters, plus of course there is Brainiac, who is certainly no slouch himself depending on what version of the character you get, but at the very least his army of androids should provide a much greater challenge for the film's heroes than the Baravian soldiers and a kaiju. I will say, as I'm naming all of these characters, I am truly worried that James Gunn might be chewing off way too much. I honestly have no idea how all of these characters will get the proper time they deserve. Thankfully, pretty much all of them will be established in previous projects first, so that should help and make it pretty seamless for those who have watched the projects. But if you have not, I could understand if you're going to be a little lost. James Gunn has yet to let me down though with any of his Marvel or DC movies though, so I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt because we were honestly saying a lot of the same things about Superman before we actually got Superman itself. But honestly, we should just change the name of this movie to Justice League, considering all of the characters who are already confirmed to be in this movie, as well as those who are rumored, but I'm sure they are keeping that name on ice until a Batman is able to join the fray, which is probably not happening until 2030 at this rate. You know how earlier I mentioned I was immensely disappointed with Ultraman in Superman? Well, I think that's another area that Man of Tomorrow can improve greatly, the villain. Now, of course the main antagonist of Superman was Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor, who was pulling all of the strings in Baravia, as well as even controlling the main physical threat of the film in Ultraman, so I can understand to some if the argument I'm going to make isn't apples to apples, considering Ultraman was truly never the main villain of the film. He was just a strong corpse so that Superman could have a big third act battle, but considering Lex is going to be in both films and likely get about the same screen time, if not more, in Man of Tomorrow, I'm going to consider that a wash and just sideline Lex from this discussion. I understand Lex may be utilized differently in Man of Tomorrow, as he is seemingly going to be teaming up with Superman to combat Brainiac, but Lex is always going to be Lex, so I'm sure he's going to be up to something nefarious within Man of Tomorrow, hoping to take Superman and Brainiac off the board at the same time. The Lex performances will be compared to each other, whereas when we think about Superman versus Man of Tomorrow, I'm going to choose to compare Ultraman versus Brainiac, considering they will be the main villain not named Lex Luthor, and yeah, I think it's an area that should be about 100 times better. I get this comparison is probably not in good faith, considering it's basically the coughing baby versus hydrogen bomb meme, and Brainiac will almost certainly have more to do in Man of Tomorrow than Ultraman did in Superman, but I think it makes sense with Lex being heavily featured in both. Ultraman was probably the most disappointing part of Superman for me, which I will take some responsibility for due to my expectations being too high. I went into the movie really hoping we would get something more exciting like Parasite, Apollo, or Bizarro, but nope, instead we got a lame ass clone that basically just yelled and I guess spoke some lines as the Hammer of Baravia. Ultraman's inclusion in the film was the absolute definition of holy fuck, we need somebody for Superman to have a big battle with at the end of the film. The only cool thing about Ultraman was the fact that he was controlled by Lex, and it was a great way of expressing just how obsessed with Superman Lex was. I'm really hoping the character gets a bit of redemption in the future, as I do think there was certainly a Bizarro tease with Ultraman being sucked through that black hole, but I would be shocked if we see him anytime soon. However, now when shifting our focus to Brainiac, I'll admit my expectations are sky high. I know I don't know a damn thing about Lars Ettinger, who has been cast to play Brainiac, but that honestly does not worry me in the slightest as of right now. Yeah, I'm sure I'd maybe be a little bit more excited if a bigger name got the role, as I simply would have a better idea as to what I would expect from Brainiac's portrayal in the movie, but if there is one thing that James Gunn knows how to do, it's casting, and I have full faith that Lars will be great in the role. That may change once we get the first trailer if I do not like what we see, but I honestly have no reason to doubt Gunn. When it comes to just my general thoughts for the character and how I hope he is portrayed, I absolutely want Brainiac to be terrifying. Brainiac is cold, calculating, and ruthless, and I am begging that Gunn fully leans into that. I don't need Brainiac cracking any jokes or truthfully being the butt of any jokes. I need Brainiac to be one of the most terrifying villains in DC movie history. Based on all the heroes joining the cast of the film, I think it's pretty clear that Brainiac will be given the scale he deserves. Now I'm just hoping that the performance and writing is up to par, and maybe I am too big of a Gunn fan, but as of right now, I truly am fairly confident it will be. Again, I understand if to some of you comparing Brainiac to Ultraman is unfair, and it's me tilting the scales towards Man of Tomorrow, as my Lex excuse may not work for you, but say we compared Lex to Brainiac, I still think Brainiac has a pretty good chance of clearing. I love Nicholas Holt's Lex Luthor, and Lex is undeniably the best Superman villain of all time in my mind, but it is just so refreshing to be getting something other than Lex or Zod on the big screen, and I think just getting something other than a Lex Luthor land grab is quite refreshing. Also, even if I say compared Ultraman to Maxima, I would be fairly confident that Man of Tomorrow will have the edge, especially if Maxima is being played by Adria Arjona, who has more charisma and screen presence in her pinky than Ultraman did in Superman. One minor area that I thought was overall good in Superman, but I definitely think could be better, was the visuals in CGI. Now, when I specifically reference the CGI, I'm not trying to diss the VFX artists who worked on the film, because like I said, for the most part, I think the CGI was good, and Lord knows they were probably changing shit weeks if not days before the film came out. I definitely think this comes down to more about how it was shot and framed, but there were some moments in Superman that were genuinely eye-poppingly weird and ugly, and I'm not talking about if you freeze frame things, it looks weird. I'm just talking about when you are watching the film normally. There were some moments that just looked really off, and that's so surprising coming from a James Gunn movie, because even though his films contain a lot of weird shit and bright colors, I don't think I can ever recall a moment in the Suicide Squad or any of the Guardians films that looked nearly as bad as some of the stuff from Superman. For example, some of the flying stuff with the camera right in his face, or when Ultraman grabs Superman by the neck at the beginning of the film and David's face looks just as pale as a ghost and like a PS5 game almost. On top of that, what the fuck was Baby Joey, and why did he look like he was meant to be in a different film? I know this is definitely coming off as nitpicky, which it definitely is. I don't know what to tell you. I love Superman, and the margins to improve for Man of Tomorrow are thin, but I think my biggest point of confusion is just the fact that I would simply never expect these types of things from a James Gunn movie, the man who made a talking tree and a raccoon look just as real as a man Superman from Earth? And why did somebody who has created some of the most colorful comic book movies of all time decide to put a color grade on a film in a way to dampen the color and brightness of a character in city that should be beaming with color? Again, there were some truly amazing moments visually, but I would say Superman is by far and away the most visually uninteresting film of James Gunn's tenure with Marvel or DC. I know comparing Superman's visuals to something like the Guardians franchise might seem a bit unfair, considering the Guardians get to go out in space. They're on places like Ego and Nowhere, which are just visually more interesting than something like Metropolis, which even though I do think is a beautiful city from the comics and I do think is a very colorful and vibrant place, there's only so much you can do with just a normal city-like landscape. However, if you want to compare it to another DC film that James Gunn has done in the Suicide Squad, I just thought some of the risks visually he took and some of the shots he had in that movie were by far and away better than what we got in Superman, and that's also including the CGI, because the Suicide Squad film also featured a lot of heavy CGI with characters like Starro and King Shark, so I just don't really know what happened. I'm hoping that Man of Tomorrow is a bit more of a return to form for James Gunn, and I'm optimistic it will be. I know for this film they're going to be changing cinematographers, and I'm not trying to throw the past cinematographer in Henry Brom under the bus, because he's worked a lot with James Gunn in the past, and he did an amazing job on things like Guardians and the Suicide Squad, so I'm not trying to say he was the issue with Superman. James Gunn definitely deserves some of the blame when it comes to some of the lack in quality in terms of the visuals, but I'm hoping that maybe just a new cinematographer in Sam McCurdy, who he has worked with on things like Peacemaker Season 2, but has not yet done a full feature film with him, is going to offer a refreshing change of pace and maybe push him to try some new things, as well as just speaking of Man of Tomorrow in general. I think the invasion of Brainiac, as well as all of the amazing new characters and heroes that we're going to have in this movie, are going to push James Gunn to do some truly insane shit. I can't wait to see what Brainiac's ship looks like, not only in terms of the design, but just how they shoot it, especially the interior of the ship. I think the battle versus Brainiac could be some of the craziest action that we've ever seen in a comic book movie, especially with all of the heroes that we know are going to be featured in the film. And I think there's a very good chance that Man of Tomorrow will feature the biggest action set piece that James Gunn has ever directed. Plus, if we get something like the City of Kandor, it'd be really cool to get another look at what Krypton was truly like in the eyes of James Gunn. I know we got some stuff from Supergirl, which I thought was probably some of the best stuff of that movie, but I would love to see maybe what Kandor looked like, and also I kind of just hope that the movie is a bit more colorful. One area of Superman where I thought there were honestly flashes of greatness, particularly in the first half of the film, was the Daily Planet, and more specifically Lois Lane, who is played excellently by Rachel Brosnahan, who has a case to be the best casting in the DCU so far, and I absolutely mean that. Brosnahan truly feels like somebody ripped Lois Lane off a comic book page, and because of that, I want more of her in Man of Tomorrow, specifically as a journalist and reporter. In Superman, one of the best scenes of the movie was the interview with her and Superman, where she basically goes for Superman's throat, poking holes in his actions and logic. Of course, it is made clear that Lois understands what Superman is doing, and almost certainly agrees with his assessment of the Baravia and Jaranpur conflict, but as an astute journalist, Lois understands that every action for somebody as powerful as Superman is a political action, and Superman needs to be a bit more level-headed and think through the potential ramifications of his actions. Not only do I think it was an excellently written scene that shows how a younger Superman may be a bit naive and not as well calculated, I thought it established Lois as an extremely capable journalist, which I do not think was carried throughout the rest of the film. I appreciate that Superman did not make Lois the classic damsel in distress, as Lois did demonstrate plenty of initiative in rescuing Superman, and even had some action moments of her own, flying the T-ship and saving some of her Daily Planet co-workers. But I wish there was a much deeper focus on her own journalistic capabilities. I understand she technically is the one that broke the story about Lex's involvement in Baravia and his vendetta against Superman, but if anyone deserves the praise or some sort of award for breaking that story, it's Eve, who basically did all of Lois and Jimmy's work for them. Without Eve, Superman is still probably locked in the pocket dimension, or worse, even dead. I'm hoping that changes in Man of Tomorrow, and Lois Lane has a bit more of a hands-on role in uncovering perhaps the mystery of Brainiac, or whatever the hell Lex is up to in the movie. Plus, on top of that, I think it'd be great if the rest of the Daily Planet crew also had a bit larger of a role in Man of Tomorrow, including Clark Kent. I would love if there was a greater focus on Clark Kent's actual day job. I feel that's a part of the character that has never been given the time it deserves on the big screen. Some films have definitely done it better than others, and Superman was certainly not one of the better examples, which I don't hate because we got so much Superman, but I think it's a vital part of the character that deserves more time. But if I had to guess in Man of Tomorrow, we once again will probably be getting a lot of Superman and not a whole lot of Clark Kent, so I'm not going to get my hopes up, but as long as Lois gets some more time to shine in that department, it'll be good enough, and a notable noticeable upgrade from Superman. I will say though, this is one of the improvements in this video that I'm going to talk about that I'm actually not all that confident will make it into the movie, just because of all of the characters that are already going to be featured. I'm sure Lois will be a focal point of the movie and will very likely have the second or third most lines, but unless this movie is inching up near 3 hours, there are only so many lines to go around, and I'm worried that Lois and the Daily Planet as a whole will get the short end of the stick. Hopefully I'm proven wrong though. Another minor thing that I personally would like to see more of, but I'm not sure it would qualify as an upgrade from Superman because perhaps some of you wouldn't care, but I would love a bit more of a deeper exploration of Krypton, most notably with the inclusion of Kandor. I do understand Krypton really was not a focus of the first film, outside of the message that we got from Cal's parents, which definitely did provide some shock value to the middle of the movie, as we did get a much darker take on Jor-El and Lara, but it was more of an excuse for Lex to take action against Superman than some deeper exploration of Krypton. The DCU's version of Krypton we still have a lot of questions about, and I'd be really fascinated to learn more about perhaps why we got a bit of a darker version of Cal's parents. Was Krypton more militarily focused in the DCU? Were Cal's parents just extremists and not representative of the whole of Krypton, which I do think we get hints towards in Supergirl, but again, it's not like we get some deeper exploration of the history of Krypton and its demise. The focus of that movie was Argo City and its sad end. I understand for some if a deeper exploration of Krypton is unnecessary, but for some reason the darker take on Jor-El and Lara just made me fascinated to learn more, and I think that Brainiac is one of the few villains who could provide that missing history and context, especially if the bottled city of Kandor is included, which is just one of the coolest artifacts in all of DC Comics in my opinion, and I would love to see it interpreted in live action. Not only would that be the perfect way to learn more about Krypton as an audience, but it'd be awesome seeing Cal getting to interact with more of his own people, and perhaps learn more about his own biological family and what they were actually like. All I ask for Gunn is please don't make Brainiac responsible for the destruction of Krypton. I'm just not a fan of that take on Krypton's demise. And lastly, probably the one thing that you could do to improve Man of Tomorrow the most is just play Last Sun by David Fleming at least 10 times in the movie. I don't know what it is about that soundtrack, but I'm absolutely addicted to it and I need more of it. So please, James, let's find a way to work that into the movie at least 10 to 20 times because I honestly think it's that damn good. However, now I want to know, in what ways do you think Man of Tomorrow can be better than Superman? Let me know in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in another video.